Recording in progress, she just said to me. And the Florence Biennale was, what was that, 20 years ago, I want to say? They're 15?
No, it was in the, I was on the jury 4 times in 2001, 3, 5, and 7. I think you were there in 2005.
It was, yeah, it would have been 2005 or 2007. I'm trying to remember which boyfriend.
Was it the year that, was it the year of Christo and Jean-Claude?
The year of Krista and John Claude and Barbara Rose was a juror. And okay, I thought we met before then.
2005.
Anyway, it was a lot of fun. So 2005 is 16 years ago.
Right.
Anyway, we have stayed in touch over the years. You were at that time in San Antonio, right, as a curator, or New Orleans?
No, I was still in New Orleans. It was right after Hurricane Katrina, and in fact, I right after the Biennale was when I returned to work full time in New Orleans. But then I was looking for another position because due to Katrina, we could no longer do the programming essentially on the level that I was hired to do. And I will say though, the 2000 to 2005, my first 5 years in New Orleans, I really consider that the Camelot of my career. And it was the most fantastic time in my life. The artist community was just so loving, so caring, so supportive. I just felt that I was, I loved what I did, and there were people who were part of it, and we were a real community. And then Katrina took that all away.
Well, just to backtrack a little, David is a curator. He is a critic. He is an artist who has a show going on right now, which he'll tell us about later. He is Harvard trained with a master's degree in art history. Tell us how you first got interested in art way back when.
Okay, well, as far as art, I showed some artistic inclinations as a child. I remember when if you really want to know, when I was in the 6th grade, I drew a portrait of my mother while we were watching TV, and it had a kind of resemblance, so everybody was impressed. And I took a couple of art classes in high school, but the 2nd semester I had a lousy teacher. The class, everybody just goofed off. I mean, she didn't really control the class, and I lost interest at that point. But then when I was an undergraduate at UCLA, I majored in philosophy, and I was taking art history classes for fun. The slide comparison method that we used to do,
I remember.
Yep, it came natural to me. I loved that method of learning. I was really good at it, and really there was a life-changing moment, and that was in a Chinese art history class taught by the late Donald McCallum. And his field was Japanese art, but he taught Chinese art also. And we learned the stylistic bases for dating the ancient bronzes. And on the midterm exam, there were about 150 students in the class. He put up an unknown. You all remember unknowns. And he said, okay, you're the museum curator. Should the museum purchase this piece or not? And write a defense of your answer. Well, I took one look at it and I knew it was off. It was a fake. So I wrote that it was a fake because, for one thing, the mask on the lid that was supposed to be upside down was right side up. But more importantly, it was as rigid as a milk carton with the pattern incised on it when he had described these objects as having very elastic contours. So I got a note on my blue book, when we got the blue books back, to come to his office and talk to him. He read my answer to the class. I met with him. He told me I had an eye. He said, you should go into art history, but there's no future in art history except in Japanese art. So at this point, I was majoring in philosophy, and actually, I loved symbolic logic, which is not that unrelated to what I was doing with the slide comparison method in art history. So I stayed an extra quarter at UCLA because in my last year or year and a half, I was learning Japanese. I was taking graduate seminars with McCallum, and I got into 4 grad schools, obviously with his support. And I said, where should I go? And he said, go to Harvard. He wanted me to study with Joan Rosenfield. Well, I got to Harvard, and I was, I grew up in the San Fernando Valley. And so here's this Valley boy, never really been on the East Coast except once very briefly. So it was a whole foreign world to me. I mean, I experienced my first snowfall when I was at Harvard. But in any case, as it happened, John Rosenfield, who was supposed to be my advisor, said hi and goodbye because he was going on sabbatical. And I started taking the Japanese language course, which was now my second year. And suddenly it wasn't fun anymore. And I felt somehow that I had been pushed into this area. And as it happened, there was a seminar taking place taught by the late Danny Robbins, who was the Albert Gleizes scholar. And it was a show, it was going to lead to an exhibition on the Cubist artist Jacques Villon, and the students were going to organize the show. We were going to study him and organize the show. I knew nothing about art exhibitions, and not that much. I knew a little bit about Cubism, but not that much. So this really interested me, it intrigued me. So I took the course. There were 6 of us in the course, including Jonathan Feinberg and Susan Grace Galassi, Mariana Shreve Simpson, all went on, in their various fields to become prominent art historians. In any case, midway through the first semester, I started timidly asking other grad students, could you change your area? Because I was a little naive about these things, and you could. So by the second year, I was studying, I think it was French and American art from the mid-19th century to the present day. And I ended up being a teaching assistant for Michael Fried, who gave me the best advice I ever received on writing. He didn't practice what he preached, but he told me that it needs to make perfect sense to someone who knows absolutely nothing about your subject. And I've hovered over my words ever since. And I also took the museum studies course in my second year. The first semester was taught by Agnes Mongan, who was the grande dame, of the Fogg Art Museum and the first female museum director in the country. And she was just an inspiration. She took us to New York and we couldn't keep up with her, and she was in her mid-60s. It was the last time she taught the course. And then, and she had us do case studies. So I did a case study of the National Gallery London and the Guggenheim. And I actually went and interviewed Louise Svensson, who was, I think, deputy director at the Guggenheim at the time. And the second semester was taught by Danny Robbins. And one of the topics that he, topics that we could choose was the relationship between the living artist and the museum, or just the artist in the museum. So I picked that one, and Danny steered me towards the irascible 18. So I learned about the whole hoopla when all the abstract expressionists picketed the Met for not showing their work and all of that. And that was really, in a sense, prophetic, because I would end up devoting my life to working with living artists. So that's kind of how it got started.
Where was your first curating job?
What's that?
Well, where was your first curating job?
Well, in a sense, the Jacques Villon show, because I ended up also working part-time as an administrative assistant to Danny Robbins while he was director. He had left by the time the Villon show opened in '75, but I got to lay out the section that I worked on and install there. Also, as a teaching assistant at Harvard, we got to install sections for the survey course. And so for a section on Cubism, I got to hang a real Cezanne and a real Picasso and Bloch and all of that. So I got some hands-on experience at the Fogg. But then I would say the real beginning of my career was my first position, which I got in 1977 when I came back to my hometown of Los Angeles to work a little bit east of LA in Claremont, at the Claremont colleges, where the director of what was then called the Galleries of the Claremont colleges. It was a joint program between Scripps College and Pomona College. And the director was David Stedman, who went on to become a museum director at the Toledo Art Museum, and before that, the Chrysler. He was a great mentor. I had a dual position, teaching art history at Scripps and working as the assistant director of the galleries. And I did that for 5 years. So that was the beginning of my professional career as a curator.
So you decided early on that you wanted to work with living artists, and what's the challenge there? What's the challenge? What are the rewards?
Well, I didn't see it as a challenge. I mean, I saw it as just great fun.
Yeah, okay.
First of all, when I came back to LA, I lived in Claremont, near Claremont in the beginning, but I very quickly moved to Silver Lake, which is an area in Los Angeles, because I found out it was perfectly okay to commute. And In those days, you could get from Silver Lake to Claremont in 45 minutes. Can't do it today, but in any case, I started, I was already reviewing for Arts Magazine. I started that. I should mention, I spent 2 years in New York while I was a grad student, researching the New York School and the topic of automatism and the origins of abstract expressionism. And during that period, I was focused on Mata's group automatic drawing sessions that he held in his apartment with Pollock, Basiotis, Motherwell, and others. Lee Krasner was there, but they wouldn't let her participate. She was supposed to stay in the kitchen with the wives. But I did interview Lee Krasner. I interviewed Motherwell. I interviewed Gordon Onslow Ford, the surrealist, Ethel Basiotis. So that also got me really interested in living artists because they were telling stories about their time as young artists. And then when I moved to LA, I started discovering the gallery scene, and all of a sudden there were artists of my own generation, my peers, who were doing really great work, and I was already reviewing for Arts Magazine. So I think the first review I wrote out of LA for Arts was on Ed Moses, his diagonal drawings, where you get all the diagonal strokes. And I had given a seminar report on Theo van Doesburg in grad school. So I thought, wow, here's another artist who really does something wonderful with diagonals. And I discovered Martha Alf during that period when her drawing was just phenomenal, a big influence on me, and we became very close.
Yeah, I don't think she's as well known as she should have been.
So she's now actually, she died in 2019, but she's now represented by Cone Gallery in Los Angeles as handling the estate. So I have great hope for a kind of revival of interest in her work. So that was, I was in heaven, because here I was in a really exciting field. I was young, so I had a lot of energy to, travel all over LA and see the shows. And I curated, there were 2 thematic shows that I curated at Claremont that really set the tone for my sort of ongoing practice of doing complex theme shows. The first was really David Stedman's idea. It was called Black and White or Colors, but he handed it to me, and it was a survey of black and white painting. And I had Pollock and Motherwell and Klein and Jack Tworkoff, Onslow Ford, Ellsworth Kelly, Leon Polk Smith, Al Held. I mean, it was just incredible stuff for a young kid. I was still in my 20s, And so, and then the second show was all LA artists. It was a show called Contemporary Triptychs. So I went from duality in the number 2 to the number 3 with Contemporary Triptychs. And then, of course, I did a lot of other smaller shows and all the things you do when you're working at a college gallery.
So tell us how you first got into being an artist yourself. You now have this, you've been doing this about 15 years, 20 years, 15 years.
Well, actually, I only got serious about my art, you're right, about 15 years ago in New Orleans. But before that, sporadically, I would engage a little bit. During my LA years from 77 to 83, because I was hanging out with a lot of artists, what happened was I started keeping a journal and doing automatic writing. And it just started getting more and more calligraphic, and then it evolved into imagery. And so a friend of mine—
Explain to me, I know what automatic drawing is, but automatic writing, just whatever's coming through your brain?
Just very spontaneous stuff, random thoughts, poetic thoughts, whatever. So anyway, an artist friend suggested I try oil pastel. So I explored oil pastel for a bit, and when I moved up, my next position was at the San Francisco Art Institute. I was director of exhibitions, and during that period, I periodically explored oil pastel a little bit. But I ultimately decided I didn't like oil pastel that much because it was really messy.
It is messy.
And then as my career moved on, from there from San Francisco, I went to the Friedman Gallery at Albright College because the dean said, I want you to go into New York often and bring all the cutting edge work back. And so—
That's fun.
So, it was kind of a weird trade-off because I would spend 3 weeks a month in Reading, which was a kind of quiet, not very exciting place. But then I would be in New York usually for about 6 days a month, going through all the galleries, really getting to learn the New York scene and curating shows, from that. For example, I did a show with, well, I did theme shows again. I mean, I did one of the first shows about AIDS when visual aids made their first call for a day without art. I said, I'm not going to do a day without art at the Friedman Gallery at Albright College, where nobody sees art on a regular basis. I'm going to use art to educate people about AIDS. So I did a show before the one, about a year or two before the one at NYU, called Art About AIDS. And you know, David Wojnarowicz and Keith Haring and a lot of other artists you would know were in that show. It was one of several theme shows that I did. It was like a laboratory for me, basically working there. And my last show, well, I did a couple of retrospectives. I gave Cynthia Carlson a retrospective, and we took sections of her big installations and sort of, you know, worked them around the room, because it was a small gallery. It was a 1,400 square foot gallery. And then I did Donald Lipsky's first retrospective at the Friedman Gallery, and that show traveled. And that's what got me to my next position. Marjorie Talalay, who was the founder and director of what was called Cleveland Center for Contemporary Art, it's now MoCA Cleveland. I applied for the job and set of chief curator and sent the Lipsky catalog and got me the job. So, and then just to finish that trajectory really quickly, after 4 years in Cleveland, where I did my show Cruciformed Images of the Cross since 1980, and Old Glory, the American Flag in Contemporary Art, big group shows, speed shows. I moved on to the Phoenix Art Museum, and the Old Glory show followed me there and created a national controversy in 1996. And I also had started working on a show called It's Only Rock and Roll, which was the first show that looked at the influence of rock and roll culture on contemporary art. And that traveled to 13 museums around the country. Just to finish up quickly, after Phoenix, I moved on to New Orleans. And then from New Orleans, I moved to the San Antonio Museum of Art. So once my curatorial career took off and I was in these high profile positions, I had no time to make art. I mean, I was just too busy curating shows, entertaining artists. I mean, one of the big projects we did in Cleveland, where I was project director, was called Outside the Frame, Performance in the Object. And I had to oversee 15 performance artists installing installations all at once. So who was I overseeing? Jackie Apple, John White, Linda Montano, Joan Jonas, and a whole host of others were all there. And it was quite an undertaking. It was certainly the most complicated installation I oversaw. And I had to also entertain them. And I remember very vividly having to carpool. I was driving one of the cars in the snow, and being a Valley boy, I don't like driving in the snow, but to Oberlin, where we had a nice dinner for them in a Frank Lloyd Wright house. But I didn't have time to make art. So it wasn't really till New Orleans. What I used to do, actually, where I would make art was when I was on vacation. I used to take my summer vacations in Amsterdam, where I would sit in the cafes and draw. I would write a journal and I would draw. And that's where I started doing these date drawings inspired by Anquara, because each day I would make a date drawing, then I would write some journal entries. I would walk all over the city taking photographs. It was just total creative time. And so I have a lot of sketchbooks and smaller things, you know, that I did on those trips. But then when I was in New Orleans, I showed some of the drawings to some artists, and one of them, Blake Boyd, went out and bought me a sketchbook with better paper than I was working on. And I said, well, now I have to get serious. So I went out and I bought some gel pens, which I'd never used before. And I wanted to do multicolored drawings, because most of what I'd been doing had been either in black or in blue, but just mostly one color drawings. So, so I started doing them in a sketchbook, and I really went to town. And at the same time, I was working on an exhibition of the late paintings by Al Held. He was still alive. In fact, I first communicated with Al Held when I was still in Phoenix. I proposed him twice in the late 90s for the Venice Biennale. He wasn't chosen. He was very bummed out by that. But I got to know him because of that. And I wrote the catalog essay for his 2000 exhibition at Robert Miller Gallery. And then that was when I just moved to New Orleans. And at that time, I proposed that we do a big show of New Orleans. Actually, it wasn't that big of a show because the paintings were so big. I had, I think, maybe just 6 paintings or 8 paintings. It was in this, 5,000 square foot gallery. So you could really get back and look at them. And it was a magnificent show. And Al was really fascinating to work with. He talked about, there were some phrases he used that influenced me in my work. He talked about interconnectivity. He said everything is interconnected and constantly expanding. He talked about the space in his paintings, which he referred to as non-gravitational, multi-directional space, which I thought was really interesting. And so while I was working on that show, every night I was doing all these drawings in the sketchbook, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to show them to Al Held and see what kind of reaction I get. And I knew from a fellow artist who had studied with him at Yale that he could be really, really tough.
Who is this, David?
I knew from an artist I knew in New Orleans.
I know, but who are you going to show the drawings to?
Al Held.
Oh, to Al, okay.
I did a conversation with him before an audience, and after the conversation, we walked into my office and I showed him the sketchbook of what I had been doing the past 6 months in the sketchbook. And not to sing my own praises, but what he said was, he said, "These are terrific." And I thought, wow, Al Held, who's like really tough on artists, just told me my drawings were good. So from that point on, I continued the practice of my drawings, my automatic drawings, and I moved on from the sketchbooks to larger paper, better paper. And so that now I work primarily with either watercolor paper or Bristol vellum. The Bristol vellum I like because it's very smooth and I can draw very rapidly. Gordon Onslow Ford, the surrealist, believed that speed was for him, it was speed in drawing. He felt that his vocabulary was line, circle, dot, because those were the fastest forms he could draw. So I worked very quickly. I worked to music also, so anyway, that's how it evolved. And
I seem to recall you had a story about a drawing that was enormously prescient of 9/11. It was,
yes,
that was
in the sketchbook that I showed Al Held. What happened was on 9/10, I made this drawing. I worked very fast. I didn't have any image in mind. I was just drawing shapes and forms and whatever. And then I looked at it and it was really ominous. And I thought, gee, I just did this really ominous drawing. What's that all about? And the next morning the towers fell. In fact, Ed Rubin called me from New York. I was in New Orleans. He said, have you heard? Turn on the TV. So the next morning is when the towers fell. And I realized it was like a premonition of sorts. And then I made another drawing the Sunday following. And when I looked at it, and I drew at close range very quickly. And when I looked at the drawing, it was like the figure from Munch's The Scream running and screaming and flailing its arms. So I wrote no words at the bottom. And then the next, maybe 6 or 7 drawings seemed to continue in that vein, where I did a drawing that I called Battered Hope. And I did a drawing, I guess it's trying to climb up the back of my chair. I did a drawing called, there was a candle image that entered into some of the drawings. And then I just moved on from there. And the drawings got very, very dense and all over with various biomorphic shapes and whatnot. And I got to a point where they were really dense, and I decided I had to bust open the billiards, which is kind of what Al Held did in the 60s when he moved from the flat AE paintings to the more geometric paintings that had a kind of more shallow space in them. So basically, I felt like I had drawn myself into a corner. I had to open up the space, and there was about a year where I kept experimenting in my sketchbook. And during that period, the Mardi Gras bead image started to emerge. And I realized eventually, that while it looks like Mardi Gras beads, it can be cells, it can be, planetary things, it can be a lot of things, cellular kind of images. But to me, it was Mardi Gras beads. And while I was working on a show for Willie Birch, the African-American artist in New Orleans, I learned a little bit about Afro-Caribbean cultural history and found out that Mardi Gras beads were placed at grave sites to ward off evil spirits. And I love that idea. So my vocabulary sort of emerged there, and I've really never stopped evolving with it since that point.
You said you had a little PowerPoint to show us from the images from your show. The show is at,
Yes, let me go to share screen.
okay. The show is at the California State University
hold
Art
on.
Galleries.
You have to first,
What do I have to do?
you have to click on, you have it disabled, so click on share screen so I can move it. Now let's see.
Okay, I now what do I have to do?
Host,
Click share?
it's still disabled. Yeah, okay, did you click share? Okay, now I should be able.
Crap.
All right, now let's see if I do it. No, it says it's still, oh, no, that's not what I want. No, that's your email. Well, disable it again, because that's not working.
How do I disable?
Select multiple participants. If you go in share screen, you can click on allow.
I know, but now I just have a little screen. Let me see. Crap.
It's still disabled.
Well, I have hide thumbnail, I have show small active speakers, I have, what does this do? I'm sorry, guys, I'm just not a pro at this. I don't know how to get back to a full screen. Show grid. Okay, now we've got the grid. And what do we want to do?
Does anybody know how to instruct Anne on this? Because right now we're all seeing your Gmail.
It's not very exciting, is it?
Well, you can close your Gmail if you have too many things open.
Close your Gmail window.
Close the email. And there's Vasari21. Okay, now it says I am screen. Do I want to stop share? It says I am screen sharing.
Yeah, do
Stop share. Yeah.
Do stop share. Whoa, come back here. There we are.
All right, now.
Hi, Elisa.
Hi.
It still says host disabled participant screen sharing. So does anyone know how she can reverse the
If you go, I don't know, but what I've used with teaching is you go into a screen share and there's a choice of allow multiple participants, something like that.
Multiple. Here we go.
Yeah, click on that.
That's what I clicked on. Now it says multiple participant.
Okay.
So now
And
try.
now it works. Hold on. Okay, so let me slideshow.
I'm impressed.
Okay, so here we are. So
Beautiful installation
thank you.
so far.
This is a little exhibition in the West Gallery at Cal State Northridge. I specifically requested this gallery because it's small and my work is intimate. So this is the title wall, then whoops. Then you enter, this is a little artist statement, and then two of my drawings there. It's pretty straightforward installation. Two more drawings there. And there, and then on the back wall here are 6 of the photographs that I take, the photographic tableau that I've been doing every day now and posting on Instagram. And I'll show you some better images in a minute when I talk about them. Then we move around to the other wall and more of the drawings. And then in the display case, I have all the 14 of the date journals, all except the one I'm currently working on, actually, that I've done so far. And there a little explanation about the date drawings. And okay, so this is one of the drawings in the show. I call them all pearls of wisdom. My process, as I mentioned, is automatic drawing, which means I draw spontaneously. I start randomly somewhere on the paper. I can never tell you where I started by the time I'm finished. It's like there's no beginning or end to these drawings. In a way, they're like Al Held in that they're what he called non-gravitational multi-directional space. One of the shows I had a solo show in San Antonio about 4 years ago that I called Embroidering the Space-Time Continuum, because I also recognized at that time was when it suddenly dawned on me that my imagery is also informed by my mother's needlework practice. My mother, when I was a senior at UCLA, my mother opened a needlepoint store and hired me as her artist in residence. I can't do needlepoint. I can't even thread a needle or do anything of that sort. but I would design compositions, and some of them were my own compositions. Some were things like dog portraits. Some were a lot of Judaica. My mother specialized in Judaica, but in any case, it was drawing over module to module to module. And when my mother would either knit or do needlepoint at home, it was at close range. I like to work with my drawing on my lap, which is very similar to how my mother would be knitting or needlepointing. It was always at close range, working with her hands. So that I acknowledge as an influence. So I turned the paper. I worked from all four sides of the paper. There's no sort of plan for what I'm going to do other than the vocabulary, which evolved over a number of years. And although some of the elements, I'll go to another one here, that I introduced recently is like here you can see there's these little, like the lines that Keith Haring used around the radiant baby. I started putting these little lines around my bead images to make them more luminous. And I also started making a lot, in the past couple of years, I started doing underdrawing with a yellow brush pen, which really was a great revelation for me because I see them, these drawings, as a kind of synthesis of both a scientific and a spiritual explanation of the universe. In other words, you can look at them scientifically the way Al Held did, but you could also look at them as the idea of the matrix of the universe, the cosmos, as being divine. I'm very influenced by Wallace Berman, whose mantra was "Art is love is God," and Allen Ginsberg's phrase "Everything is holy." And so, to me, the idea of something scientific and something spiritual are not at odds. They can be united, and I feel that, in a sense, that's what I'm doing. And when I started working with the yellow brush pen, I realized I'd found a way to make my bead images shine from within, light up from within. And I was raised in the we went to a Jewish conservative synagogue when I was a kid. I went to Sunday school, went to Hebrew school, took it really seriously, wanted to be a rabbi when I was 12 years old. But I'm a non-practicing Jew, but I have a strong sense of my spiritual self. And so I express that through this kind of imagery. Now, when I first started sort of titling them as a series, I was using two other titles in my earlier Instagram posts. I was using either Crown, which I probably called this one when I first did it because it sort of reminded me of the jewels on a crown, and I was watching the Netflix series at the time, and I became really interested in the connection between the Queen and divinity. I hadn't realized she was considered the spiritual head of the UK, and that was the first time I knew that, so that became interesting to me. And then some of them I called Tree of Life, Arbol de la Vida, because during my San Antonio period, there's a lot of Mexican cultural tradition there, and the Tree of Life, the Arbol de la Vida, is a very prominent image. So I just come from a place where I lived for 10.5 years where I saw a lot of that. But then ultimately, I realized, you know what, these are more, I had used Pearls of Wisdom a couple of times for previous compositions, and suddenly I realized that's what these really mean to me, because I feel that knowledge is just a fantastic thing, and particularly in an age when there's more disinformation, all over the place. But real knowledge is truth. And without using the word truth, which seems at this point in time to be political, I just felt these are pearls of wisdom. So in fact, in my artist statement that's on the CSUN website, I had them quote me as saying, we're given the tree of life at birth, but we have to build the tree of knowledge from the ground up. So in a way, I'm building the tree of knowledge from the ground up with these pearls of wisdom in these drawings. And then these are some of the journals that I started doing in 2018. What happened there was in 2018, I decided I would take another summer trip to Amsterdam, but it was a much longer flight because I was now in LA. And I got real sick to my stomach the morning I left. And when I got there, I was still sick, and it was over 80 degrees and there was no air conditioning. And I was really just felt like I was dying, and it was horrible. So I spent a bundle of money and came home the next day and suddenly had a revelation or an epiphany that, you know what? Why don't I just start doing, I'm now, quote, semi-retired working out of my home. Why don't I make the date drawings a daily practice rather than something I did just when I was on holiday? Because I'm no longer working full-time at an institution, so I have the time to do it. So these are some of the, from the series of 14 that I do every day now. And then what happened was I started posting initially just documentation. It was just like one of them open, it was clearly a documentation image on Instagram every day. But as they evolved, I started making compositions out of them, Tableau. During this period, after I moved back to LA, I got to see my friend Martha Alf more often. And at this point, she was living in assisted living and very frail. But she had in the corner next to the window of her little studio apartment in assisted living, she had a little place where she would set up these still life arrangements with lots and lots of fruits and flowers. And she would have someone arrange them as she directed, and she would create these absolutely gorgeous photographic tableau every day and post them on Instagram. You can look them up because I think the last one was a few months before she died in 2019. But anyway, I started doing the same thing, but with the objects that I have, in my little home studio. And initially, again, they were just documentation. Then I started, and actually, you can see in the one on the left there where one of my drawings is in the background. Well, Martha Alf used to do that in her photographs. Like she would have a monochromatic red painting. People don't know that she also did abstract painting in addition to all the representational work. And she would make backgrounds out of her paintings in various photographs that she took. But as they evolved, I started putting in other objects such as the clock that sits on the same desk where I sit by my computer and where I make my drawings. And then I added the blood pressure monitor, which basically because of my heart, et cetera, my age, I'm supposed to take my blood pressure every day. So I take it first thing in the morning. So the numbers aren't really at the time I took the photograph, they're basically what I registered that morning. And then also the drawing materials, you can see there, the various pens. Although, even though I have more pens than I use in there, sometimes I'll use an odd pen, but primarily I use 2 shades of red and a green that are Stabilo. Stabilo is a fabulous brand that you get a really quick, smooth, wonderful line out of it. And I used to buy Stabilo pens at a little art store in Amsterdam. You can get them online from Blick or anyplace else. And then I discovered the purple pen that I now prefer. You can see it in this one right here, is Deco color. And I just love the saturation of the purple there. And when I work on the watercolor paper, of course, it saturates more. I get a very lush image with it. So, and then I've been really having fun actually playing with the little, I keep changing the color of the sketchbooks. So different ones of the little journals here, they're 4 by 6 inches. And so the color of the little ribbon will change when I start a new book. And also I like the idea, which I realized after the fact, that I've always been interested in numbers. Jackson Pollock's number was 46. Lee Krasner told me about this. And so back in the day when I was studying all that, I realized for various reasons that my number is 18. And when I looked at the address, 46 was in Jackson Pollock's address many times. And when I looked at the address of the street I grew up on, 618 is in the address. It's 12618. And the 618 is my birthday. And I realized later that the 26 is my older brother's birthday. So it was really interesting. So I'm fascinated by numbers and when you use them in unconventional ways. So anyway, so I have hand-drawn numerals, analog numerals, and digital numerals. So what comes together is 3 different forms of representation of numbers in the photographic tableau. And of course, you can see them on Instagram at David S. Rubin Art. So that's what I've been up to.
Well, I would like to turn the dialogue over to the audience now, but I've got a question for you right off the bat, and that is, I'm sure that many of my members would love to have a museum show such as you arranged at the art galleries in California State. What advice do you have for them on finding a venue, on approaching a curator?
Well, what I did was I targeted a place where I felt there was a connection that might interest the director. I had met the director because when I came back to LA, I started meeting people in the art world, and he's almost my age, roughly the same, same generation. He lives on the west side where I live. He's since retired, but so after we met, and I invited him over to see my work. What I did was I emailed him with a proposal. And basically, I decided I would play the Valley card because I'm a Valley boy. I grew up in the Valley, and they had previously done a show there called Valley Vista, which was about work by artists from the Valley or who grew up in the Valley. So I knew they had an interest in that at their museum. And for me, I thought it would be great because my whole family, for the most part, lives in the Valley. So I thought, wow, maybe they'll finally see my artwork, my siblings. But in any case, so I guess in my case, I first met him, established a rapport, then made the proposal, talked about the influence of my mother and pointed out that she had run a needlepoint store in the Valley. So there's that connection there. And so he came and looked at the work and he loved the work. And so the show was originally scheduled for September of 2020. And unfortunately, I lost out on what would have been a great opportunity because again, I requested this smaller gallery, and by the way, I had been to see a couple of the shows there, so I had become familiar with the space also before I proposed it, which is why I specifically proposed it for this smaller space where they do a lot of student shows, but occasionally do other shows in there, and so originally the show in the main gallery that was going to be concurrent with mine was going to be photographs from the LACMA collection. It was going to be one of LACMA's first satellite shows while they're under renovation. And what a coup that would have been, to have LACMA people have an opening and get to see my show. Unfortunately, my show's happening during the time of COVID and very few people will ultimately see it, but it's still a great opportunity. And it also, for me, it's very fulfilling because I feel like, during COVID, well, also I will say the delay gave me more time. And I feel like I advanced my work further. The drawings became more complex. So in a sense, I had a better show, in my opinion, because of COVID, but at the same time, I lost out at this great PR opportunity that would have, I would have piggybacked on everybody's interest in LACMA. So, but I'm doing my best to document it. I'm very grateful to you, of course, Anne, for having me talk about it here. But that's how it came about. So, and when artists ask me, when I worked as a curator, I always say, find out about spaces where there seems to be a history of showing the kind of work that you do, and then it always helps to find a way to meet the people in person. But if you can't do that, find a rationale. Like if you were born in a certain city and you don't live there, but they have a gallery there that might show your work, approach that gallery. Say, I'm a native, and it would be so great to have my work shown in my hometown. Find a hook, in other words, of that sort.
Is there any kind of directory that artists could go to? I know Art in America used to, I don't know if they still do, used to produce a guide every year that was a guide to galleries, museums. Do you know of anything online that would be helpful?
Well, I think different art journals have their own directories. I know Visual Art Source has a directory, but a lot of them probably do. I think Artillery here in LA has some kind of listing of what's going on each week. There's also here in LA, there's a website that's run by an artist called What's on Los Angeles that lists everything that's opening every week, complete list of what's showing in all the galleries. So I would suspect there's similar websites almost everywhere where there's an art scene. The one thing you shouldn't do is approach a place where there's no logic, no rationale for why that venue would be interested in your work. Like if it's a craft museum and you don't do crafts, don't approach them unless there's some connection between their imagery to craft, In other words, try to make it logical in some way so that and then make your case. And that's exactly what I did. I said, I grew up in the Valley and my mother had this needlepoint store and this influenced my work, and it would be so great to have the exhibition in the Valley. And so why don't you come take a look at it? And I piqued his interest. If he didn't like the work, it wouldn't have had the show, but pique their interest, then, get them to see the work and hopefully you'll get a show out of it.
Let me turn it over to the audience, to the members. Questions for David? I'll put the chat box there. You could try putting them in the chat box. You can unmute yourself, I think, or I can unmute you. You can raise your hand. You can, anybody? Well, how do you balance your many interests? You're a critic, you write for Visual Arts Source, you have the drawings, you have curating. How do you manage it?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm semi-retired now. I work out of my home space. So I don't have the kind of routine I had when I worked at an institution. In addition to the usual 9 to 5 routine, there was lots of after hours work that came with the territory. I don't have any of that anymore. So, I'm home during the day now, so I can kind of make my own schedule. And so, as I say, when you reach a point of semi-retirement, I think you can do what you want in that regard. And you've got the luxury of the time to do it. When you're fully employed in an institution, you don't have that luxury. So I managed to do my drawings ongoing while working in New Orleans and San Antonio, but that was always, after hours on my own time and not during the normal workday. Now I can do it during the normal workday.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions from the Peanut Gallery here. Aiden Sinclair wanted to know if the gallery took on promotion of your show.
I did most of what I could. The thing is, because of COVID, this is the first show they've had since COVID.
Cookie.
This is
What's going on?
what's going on there.
I don't know.
This is the first show they've had since COVID. Also, now there's an interim director who was the assistant to Jim Sweeters, the director, who had basically invited me to do the show. What happened was when COVID happened, and in that he's almost my age, they offered him a really sweet retirement package. And so he took the retirement package. Being that they're just opening up for the first time after COVID, there are really, really tight restrictions. I mean, it's almost as if they didn't want anybody to see the show, because to see the show, you have to make an appointment online. You also have to go online the day you're going to visit the show and fill out a COVID response form. And then you get a confirmation, and then you have to email that to the interim director. Parking is not easy there. It's sometimes hard to find where the parking is. And for those who are visitors, it's $8 to park. So there's a lot of obstacles, I think, to getting there to see the show. So what I did was I put together my own
Cookie.
I put together my own PDF and sent it out to some of the people I know. I used Facebook. I made a Facebook event for the opening day. She couldn't even call it an opening reception because there were more hurdles she would have had to go through of red tape if she had called it a reception. So there was no party, there were no, drinks, nothing like that. Masks are required. And so, again, a small group of people are able to get out there to see the show. They also were very gracious in letting me, they're not open on Sundays, but I asked if I could be there on the last 2 Sundays from 1 to 3 p.m. And they said yes. And they're promoting that. They are promoting it now. I mean, they didn't get it on their website till the day before the opening, I think at the end of the day, before the opening day. But now the website looks great, although I'm sure it'll be replaced very soon because the show's only up for 3 weeks. So, and they did send a press release, but again, at the very last minute. So unfortunately, because of COVID and very little staff, I mean, the interim director has to do everything herself with only the help of students. They did a great job hanging the show. But I came there, I laid it out, which I would have done anyway, because it's laid out the way I wanted it. And they were very accommodating to me in that regard. So just a lot of obstacles to doing things the way we used to right now.
I'm trying to take questions in order, and I know Rhonda was waving her hands. Do you want to, can you unmute yourself, or can you put the
Yes,
question?
yeah. I was really interested in automatic drawing, and I had totally forgotten about its history. And you could call your work, improvisational or spontaneous, but you're calling it automatic. And there's that history of connecting to the subconscious. And I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Yes, well, I mean, that's what I was researching as a grad student. And, and I learned during that, well, I actually used to give a lecture on the history of automatism from the 19th century all the way through Jackson Pollock. So, in fact, one of the first automatists of the 19th century, if you want to look him up, there was a British artist named Austin O. Spare, S-P-A-R-E. I love his work. And then there was the French artist, Victorien Sardou, S-A-R-D-O-U. I feel my work has an affinity with theirs and the kind of organic linear quality of what they did. So, I mean, that whole history is ingrained with me because back in my, late 20s, early 30s, I gave that lecture quite a bit and went through all the surrealists, and I was able to, talk about the different ways that artists use automatism. Victor Hugo, of course, used coffee stains as a point of departure for making the composition. So it's a fascinating history. But so I use the term because it's something that I studied quite extensively. And it really, and it's because of that I started doing it myself.
Well, it must start with Freudian ideas about the unconscious and the subconscious, and people taking those theories very seriously back in the 30s and 40s.
Well, in the 20s, when Andre Breton founded Surrealism, they were all interested in Freud. But by the later 30s, say the time that Dornazzo Ford became part of the group, they were more interested in Jung, and certainly Pollock and Basiotis and the others were very Jungian in their orientation. And one of the things that they were interested in was Jung's idea that there's a predetermined pattern for each life, and that by recognizing your individual cues or clues, whatever you want to call them, and numbers are part of that. That's where the Jackson Pollock and the numbers and my own number come into the picture. I mean, there was a period when every time I looked at my digital clock, my number would appear. It was like I would just instinctively look, and there was the 18. And so I do think there's something to that. I can't explain it much beyond that, other than that it gives me some kind of reassurance that there is something to the eye. I mean, basically, I think that free will and determinism coexist, that there is a predetermined plan, but within the predetermined plan, we exercise our free will and we can veer on or off. It's like I once gave there was a new age group in Phoenix that once invited me to give a lecture. So I gave a lecture called Life is a Freeway. And I explained this concept by saying, it's like you're driving on the freeway, which is your plan for your life, but you make a wrong turn, that you can find your way back on. So you can make a wrong turn and you can get off your plan when you make the wrong decision about something, but then sometimes you make the right decision and you're right on track again.
Yeah, I think that was a song, wasn't it? LA is a great big freeway.
Maybe so.
Put 100 down and buy a car. Anyway, a question from Karen Snowfer. How do you pronounce your last name?
Snowfer.
Okay. Can you comment on, got it. Can you comment on the role of abstraction right now in the art world? So much work that is getting recognition relates to identity and figurative imagery.
I think that's just, I mean, trends come and go. I think what we're seeing right now with all the identity issue work, I mean, we're in a very, intense political era, let's put it that way. And, with the huge division in the US, these are issues that are in the forefront, and art always reflects its time. That kind of art is at once personal and speaks to larger audiences because it kind of deals with members of a certain group in a sense. Say if it's work about gender, then people who are facing gender issues in their own lives obviously relate to that work. I think what I'm doing is a little more universal than that because I'm talking about life itself, existence itself. And maybe that's because my background was in philosophy before, I turned to art history, and also my early sense of wanting to be a rabbi at one time. So I come from a kind of philosophical approach, but, there's a lot of political art and there's a lot of political abstraction. And I think there's a lot of great stuff being done. I also see a lot of abstraction that's just boring and repetitive. But, I feel what happened with me is that it took a number of years as it evolved, but I feel in a way, I look at my show at CSUN as my self-taught art MFA. I feel like if I had gone through an actual training and we work towards an MFA, this show is like an MFA show because there's 3 bodies of work. I feel like it's my mature vision. I'm already now, I just bought a new pad of larger scale watercolor paper than I've worked on before because I feel like, okay, I've just completed something. Now I need to change a little bit. Peter Coyne once told me that whenever she gets itchy or she feels she's getting into a rut or, she'll change her medium or she'll change something like that to kind of move her in another direction. So I'm not going to move in a big direction because my work is focused in what it is. But I'm really interested right now in the lushness of what I get when I work on watercolor. And so I just started working with this new pad on the size. It's 18 by 24. It's 1 inch smaller than my large Bristol vellum works. But I'm on my second drawing already with this paper, and I'm loving it because there's something new about it in that. But again, with abstract art, there's a proportion of it's really, really good, but then there's a lot of mediocre stuff, and it's always been that way.
Yeah, my take is, if you're an abstract artist, you are an abstract artist, and there's no way around that. You can't suddenly start doing figurative painting or identity painting or whatever you want to call it, and that the pendulum does swing. It will. We don't know what it will swing toward. It could swing toward performance, or I have no idea. But you have to sort of keep going with what feels right and what feels real to you, and let the marketplace do whatever it's going to do.
Yeah, yesterday I did a Zoom for some of the CSUN grad students, and one of them said she was getting a lot of flack for dealing with spirituality in her work. And I reassured her that there's a lot of artists who deal with spirituality, but I also said, look, you have to do work that's about you, not about somebody else. Ultimately, it comes down to what has meaning for you. And that seemed to satisfy everybody, after I said it. But it's true, you got to be true to yourself when you make your art.
Well, I look at the example of Larry Bell in my little hometown of Taos now, who was, as you know, very big in the 60s and 70s. Beautiful, beautiful, minimalist, but also very kind of sensuous in its own way. And he kept on with that, and he's done variations. He has made hanging sculptures, he's made beautiful prints, but he went through some really tough times because the work was no longer popular. It was picked up and it was a big deal for 10 years, and then it wasn't. And he toughed it out, and he's always managed to sell a little bit, but now he's like, I think he's represented by Hauser and Wirth, and he's back on top of the pyramid. So it's unpredictable. You just have to go with what works for you.
Well, again, first and foremost, it's for yourself. If you sell your work, the more power to you. That's wonderful. Because I don't depend on my artwork to make my living. I'm not in the same category as a lot of artists who do. So, I have to, be very candid about that. For me, whether I sell or not, it's not going to affect my ability to survive, so to speak. But for many, I'm sure, who really, they're full-time artists and that's all they do, it's another, ball game.
Let me take another question. You mentioned that you listen to music while you're drawing. Can you tell us what you like to listen to?
I knew that, but that's a popular question. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley listening to top 40. So I was really weaned on pop music, and I listened mostly to pop music of my generation. My favorite singer of all time is Jennifer Warren. She has the voice of an angel, and I'm privileged to have gotten to meet her and become her friend over the years. But I listen to other music of that generation, you know, from the Eagles to the Bee Gees to, I love James Taylor, you know. Usually it's just a mix of that kind of stuff.
Patty Orsby had a question. Your comments about the divine and art spoke to my own motivation and inspiration. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Is it intended or is it something that evolves?
What do you mean? Is it you mean, is it intended by me? Is that what the question is?
Where's Patty? And I guess I'm the one who has to unmute her.
I'm here.
Okay.
Hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So when you spoke about the divine when you were talking about one of your particular drawings, I was wondering, is that something like, are you thinking, okay, I want to make this sacred, or is it something that just kind of evolves as you're working and you're feeling it and it just becomes?
Well, it has to do with, in part, it's more like a metaphor in a way.
Okay.
I mentioned how I was able to create luminosity, which really pumped up my drawings a level when I started doing the underdrawing with the yellow brush pen. Having been raised in Judaism, we have the eternal light in the synagogue. So I've always equated divinity with light and what we call the everlasting light or the eternal light. And in fact, when I used to teach, you know, I would teach about Rothko and Newman, I couldn't help but bring the eternal light into the conversation, because for me, you know, even though they were non-practicing Jews, which I am as well, the idea of everlasting light, that to me is the perfect symbol of divinity. So it's more like a symbolic or metaphoric connection. But
So sublime, you would say.
yeah, sublime, you could call it that. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Thank you.
Other questions? Well, we've been going for about an hour. I can't think of anything. I think this has been a wonderful presentation. I wish you tremendous luck with your show. Oh, as a critic, I know what I would ask you. Are you going to be able to get anyone to review your show? You must know a lot of people.
There already was a preview of sorts. It caught me by total surprise, but Bill Lazaro, who's my editor for Visual Art Source and a longtime friend, did not tell me he was planning this. But if you go to the Visual Art Source website, he wrote a column, an editorial of sorts a few weeks ago, where he pointed out that there were 3 artists of Social Security age who were about to open shows. The other 2 were Kim Abeles and Linda Vallejo, and I was so honored to be in their presence. I have written about both of them, but and Bill acknowledged that he has biases because he's known all of us for years and all of this, but he wrote the most beautiful words about my work. So so that's what I have so far. I have reached out to various writers. As far as I can tell, no one has bit the bullet yet, although one writer who will remain nameless said that he or she would review it, but I'm not seeing any follow-up as hard as I'm trying to make that happen. So, but the show's up still for another week. So if that particular writer is able to get over to see the show, and I've been trying to encourage that, maybe something will come from it. But, you know, you just have to face the facts. It's COVID time. It's difficult to get there. You know, it's not, you know, it's about maybe a half-hour drive from LA, you know, parking is difficult. I'm really pleased though, a couple of legendary Los Angeles gallery owners came to see my show. I mean, they don't have galleries anymore, but I was thrilled that the incredibly still energetic Molly Barnes came to see the show on the opening day, as did Rosamund Felsen. And they both loved what they saw, but neither one of them has galleries anymore. But in any case, I'm not holding my breath, but if something, there's still, I say about another week. So if something happens, it will. If it doesn't, at least I have the beautiful words of Bill Lazaro.
Mocha Luggett had a question that's apropos of this. What would be the best way to get a reviewer to write about your show? Any advice on that?
Well, usually you should depend on the institution, but in this case, because I'm dealing with these COVID circumstances and an interim director who had to rely on the college, you know, outside of her department to do the website, et cetera. I took it upon myself, but I had the connections to be able to promote it myself. As a rule, if you're showing it at a public venue, you know, it's the venue's responsibility to do all that, and you should do your best to maybe check in with them and say, you know, have you sent the press release out? May I see the press release before it goes out? You know, things like that to kind of tactfully, not rudely, not, you know, not impatiently, but tactfully, you know, encourage them, give them a little push to make sure they're, and also if there are particular writers and you know, you have their email addresses or whatever, you know, and you say, you know, are these people on your press list? Which also helps them because then they'll add people to their press list if they're not already on it. So the best you can do is, I mean, ideally you want to rely on the venue to do that for you. But, you know, as a rule, I wouldn't do it myself, but these are unusual circumstances. And I felt with the show being up for such a short period and hard to see, I had to be proactive. So if you're in a situation where you think it's going to be difficult, then maybe you should be proactive like I was.
May I also suggest the time-honored tradition of graft, take a critic to dinner. Someplace nice.
I don't know, you know, or just offer them.
I always got my attention.
Offer them to tour them.
March checks, tape.
Offer a personal tour of the show, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And then take her to dinner.
Right.
Okay, well, guys, thank you so much. David, we'll be in touch again soon. And good luck with your last week of the show.
Thank you so much. I will be there. If anybody, I guess there's nobody from LA watching this at the moment, but I'll be there this Sunday again from 1 to 3. And I know some artists who already told me they're coming to visit. And so it'll be, you know, small but sweet. And what can you do? I mean, it's documented. Oh, and I'll tell you one other thing I am doing. I hired a video person who makes short documentaries on LA artists. His name is Eric Min Swenson, and he has a YouTube channel where he's done about 1,000 videos on LA artists. So he went and videotaped the installation, and he was over here yesterday videotaping me, and then in about 2 weeks I'll have a little short video which I can send to you, Anne, if you want to post a link to it or something, so so people can see the show after the fact that way.
Okay, guys, thank you all, and I will send you the recording, David. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
All right.
Thank you.